More than any other stroke, breaststrokers can change their timing to change their speed. They can directly influence how continuously they create propulsion, which that means they can directly influence how much speed they create. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. Breaststroke is unique because swimmers create propulsion with the arms and then they create propulsion with the legs. For the most part, they don't happen at the same time. That's definitely not the case in backstroke, butterfly, and freestyle. That means swimmers can change their speed by changing how much time happens between propulsive actions with the arms and the legs. That leads to different ways to time the stroke, and you see that across different event distances. Over shorter events, swimmers are going to shrink the time between propulsive actions until it completely disappears, whereas in longer events, swimmers are going to expand the gap between propulsive actions that will allow them to create a lot of speed, but also get recovery between what their arms and legs are doing, which means they can sustain that speed for a lot longer. Effective breaststroke requires timing the propulsive actions to match the demands of the race. In this video, we're going to check out how swimmers change their timing to change their speed and how that directly influences the amount of propulsion that they create, which determines how much speed swimmers will be able to create and how long they'll be able to sustain it. Let's take a look at elite swimmers in action, making it happen. So we'll start off here with a swimmer racing over 200 meters, and we're going to take a look at those gaps in propulsion and how that influences the stroke. So what we're going to see here is she's going to apply force with the upper body. She's pulling, she's creating propulsion with the upper body, and that's happening. And now at this point, she's not really creating any more propulsion with the upper body. And if you look at her lower body, she's still recovering the leg. So she's not applying propulsion with the arms. She's not applying propulsion with the legs. There is a gap. And that gap is going to lead to a loss of speed. And so it's not until right about there that she actually starts applying pressure backwards with the legs and starts to create propulsion. So we have a gap from right about here until right about there where there's no propulsion being created. And so obviously that's going to lead to a loss in velocity. It's also going to give the arms and the legs more time to recover, which means hopefully that those propulsive efforts can be sustained for a longer period of time. Now, if we go to the legs here, she's creating propulsion there. And by this point, she's created most of the propulsion she's going to get out of the kick. And now nothing has happened yet with the upper body. And so she's sculling out here. She hasn't really started to apply pressure too much. Maybe about this point, she started to create propulsion. And so we have a gap from about here to here that she's not creating propulsion either. So we've got these gaps that are happening in the stroke, which are going to lead to a loss in speed, because if you're not creating propulsion, your swimmers are not going to be moving forwards. But again, if she's not using the legs, she's not using the arms, that's going to allow for more recovery. So having watched it from the perspective of what's happening with the arms and the legs, let's take a look at those individually. And so at this point, her arms are more or less recovering. She's not creating much propulsion. She's not creating much force. She's not using much effort with the upper body. So from here until all the way she gets to probably right about there, she gets to let the upper body rest, which means she's going to be able to create more force next time around because she's had an extended period of recovery. Now, if we watch the legs, the kick finishes right about there. And so from here until right there, she hasn't used the legs hardly at all. And even in this position, she's recovering the legs. So it's not necessarily the same muscles that she's using to create propulsion. And so she gets a big break in terms of what's happening with the legs as well. So she uses the arms, she uses the legs. There's gaps in propulsion between the arm actions and the leg actions, and that allows her to get a little bit more recovery so that her speed is a little bit more sustainable. So she's still creating a lot of propulsion. She's keeping the gaps relatively small, but they're large enough that allows her to recover between those actions so that she can continue to maintain her speed. And this tends to be the strategy that you see with most 200 breaststrokers, especially relative to what they would do over a 50 or 100. There's going to be more space between the kick and the pull and the kick, which allows for recovery. The key is to try to find the sweet spot where swimmers can create as much speed as possible because they're creating as much propulsion as possible, while also being able to sustain that speed and by getting enough break in between the arm actions and the leg actions to be able to repeat them. And breaststroke is a very difficult stroke. And so for a lot of swimmers, if everything's stacked right on top of each other, it's going to be very difficult to manage that, especially over 200 meters. And with an understanding of what's happening generally, there are also swimmers that are much better at kicking, and they tend to ride out the kick a little bit more in the front, somewhat like this swimmer. However, if the swimmer is not very good at the kick, they're not going to have the luxury of maintaining a long position out in front. They're going to have to get into the stroke a little bit sooner. And so there's the general principles, but then there's also how they apply specifically to individuals. To better illustrate these concepts, let's take a look at another swimmer who's racing over 100 meters using a much higher stroke rate and how they're organizing the stroke to minimize the gaps in propulsion to maximize the amount of speed that they're creating. And so he's going to finish the kick right there, and then he's already kind of getting into that position where he's applying pressure immediately and then starting to execute the pull. So the gap is going to be a lot smaller. Now, if we watch the pull here, he's going to get into that much faster. And so he's doing that by recovering the arms faster, he's recovering the legs faster so that he can get into position much quicker, and so he can create propulsion as soon as possible. And so one thing that he's got to do is he's got to make sure he finishes the pull before he recovers the legs, because that allows him to maintain a really good body line when he applies the pull. And then he tries to get into that position. And as soon as he's in streamline again, or close to streamline, he's going to kick then so he can kick in a streamline position. But he's making this happen as fast as he can. The gaps are much tighter, much smaller. That's going to mean more speed, but that also means he's not going to be able to sustain it as much because he doesn't have those recovery breaks. So it's the same idea, it's just that there's much less patience. The gaps in propulsion are going to be smaller, even if the same basic timing is there. And so both swimmers, they're going to kick when their upper body's in streamline, and they're going to pull when their lower body's in streamline. This swimmer is transitioning between those two positions as quickly as possible. You see that right there. And then after the kick, he's getting right into the pull as quickly as he can too. And so the same ideas, it's the same concepts. The stroke just shrinks. Those propulsive gaps are eliminated as much as possible, and that allows swimmers to create more propulsion in the same amount of time, which means they can create more speed. Now, there are some swimmers that push that to the extreme, and they will actually overlap the phases of propulsion with the arms and the legs. And so we can see this swimmer here. He's going to finish his kick right there, and he is already well into the pull. And so he's being more aggressive, certainly than the first swimmer, and even more than the second swimmer in terms of getting into that propulsive phase with the upper body prior to finishing the kick. But we still see that he's finishing the pull here. His legs are still in streamline, and then he's getting into that really quick. And then he's kicking when his upper body's in streamline. So the same idea, but he's just getting right into the pull a little bit sooner. The other swimmers were waiting a little bit longer to start executing the pull, but he's getting into that right away. And so by the time the feet have actually closed, he's well into the stroke. He's actually applying pressure back, and that's going to allow him to maintain propulsion a little bit more continuously, which may allow him to create a little bit more speed. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to go faster than the previous swimmer. It just means that he's creating propulsion more continuously. If his overall skills aren't as good, he's not going to be as fast, but this may allow him to create a little bit more speed for his abilities. So again, still pulling when the legs are in streamline, but then as soon as they do, he gets into it, and he's still kicking when the arms are in streamline, but he just gets into that pull a little bit faster, a little bit sooner, and the goal is to try to be a little bit more continuous with the propulsion so he can create a little bit more speed. Now, if we look at 50 breaststrokers, it goes even further. And so if we watch this swimmer here, by the time he finishes the kick, he's well into the pull, and then he's executing the pull, and then he's getting right into it. And so still, he's executing his kick when his upper body's in line, and he's executing the pull when his lower body's in line, but there is zero hesitation at any point in the stroke. He's moving right into it right away. And so again, by the time the feet close there, he's well into the stroke, whereas our other swimmers were still in a more or less streamlined position. And so he's being a lot more aggressive with the timing. However, still being careful to pull while the legs are in streamline, still being careful to kick. You can see right there when his upper body is more or less in streamline, but just really shrinking those gaps so that there is zero pause. And you can see he's still kicking there, and the orientation of his hands are already facing backwards. He's already creating propulsion with the upper body. So the same timing principles are present. As much as possible, the arms are pulling when the legs are in line, as we see there, and the legs are kicking when the arms are in line, as we see there. However, the amount of space between the pull and the kick and the pull is going to change based upon the event distance. Relative to themselves, swimmers will shrink the gap when they want to go faster over shorter distances because sustainability is less of an issue, and the gaps are going to expand when they swim over longer distances because they need to try to get a little bit more recovery and they don't need to maximize absolute speed. If you want to learn more about how to improve breaststroke timing, check out the video below.